Hello everybody and welcome to my talk Building for Sustainability with WordPress. My name is Jack Lennox and I'm very happy to be presenting here at SustainableUX. Before I launch into things, I'm just going to share a little bit about me. I'm a software engineer at the WordPress.com VIP team. We do sort of enterprise level WordPress stuff and we work under the umbrella of our parent company Automatic. So that was where I started out, and now I'm at WordPress.com VIP. Having had a growing interest in environmental issues, I unexpectedly decided to stand in a parliamentary by-election in the UK in 2017 for the Green Party of England and Wales, and that's me over the left shoulder of the guy at the lectern announcing that I hadn't won, unfortunately. After attending the Mozilla Festival in 2017 and attending a planet-friendly web session by my fellow speaker at this conference, Chris Adams, I began to learn about the connection between sustainability and the internet. And I decided to spend some time thinking about how I could contribute to improving the situation. I came up with SustainableUX, which is a theme and website that I intended to be an experiment in minimalist, sustainable web design, and also a means of raising awareness about sustainability, the internet, and with a particular focus on WordPress. This led to me writing a post about the project for CSS Tricks, delivering WordPress in 7 kilobytes, and an article on the broader topic for Smashing magazine. So let's start with the problem, and fortunately I'm not the first speaker to be raising this today. The internet has an enormous carbon footprint, and it's rapidly growing. This problem was highlighted by Mozilla in their Internet Health Report of 2018. The Internet Health Report highlighted an article by The Guardian which cited research showing that the carbon footprint of the internet was somewhere close to that of air travel, and as Anne's talk was alluding to a bit earlier, it's sort of turning from close to air travel to multiples of air travel based on the growth of the internet. Well, it could be multiples of air travel. It's not yet, but that's what we're trying to avoid. Yeah, this article that the Internet Health Report's referencing from The Guardian is actually from 2015. So it's obviously... I don't need to talk anymore about this, it's already being covered by other speakers. But the important other aspect to that, which again has been made, is that due to the general energy mix of the planet, this technically makes the internet the largest coal-fired machine on Earth. And this graph is taken from Greenpeace's Click Clean report, which audits all of the big internet companies. Again, there's been some reference to this already. It holds them to account for their environmental impact, and it shows that were it a country, global IT communications, much of which is the internet, would be the third largest country on Earth by its energy usage. We can thus conclude that poorly performing websites are bad for the environment, and websites are getting less and less performant in many ways. They're getting better in many ways as well, but there's not a great trend. Tammy Avetz of SpeedCurve wrote one of the most comprehensive, relatively recent posts considering the current state of page bloat, and in her post she points out that some of the flaws and narrative around measuring the health of the web by using average page sizes, but for the sake of simplicity and in our current context, average page sizes kind of work. So I'm using graphics from her post here in these next few slides. As you can see, they've grown a lot since 2011. The average page weight today is, well, in 2017 was 3 megabytes, today it's more than that, and in 2011 it was 929 kilobytes. To understand kind of how that trend has been working, there's a good breakdown here, which kind of shows how it's split between images, scripts, HTML, style sheets, video fonts, and other. As you can see, images in 2017 still make up the largest amount. Unfortunately, this is the most recent data we have because HTTP Archive, who store this data, stopped doing averages. And I won't go into that, but yeah, we don't know beyond 2017. We know the median, but we don't know the average. So images still in 2017 are the biggest part. They were the biggest part in 2011. They're slightly less proportionately in 2017, and that's partly due to the rise in video, which, as you can see, is a huge chunk now. Video pretty much didn't exist online in 2011, or certainly didn't as something that the average web developer should be concerned about. And Tammy predicted, based on the stats available to her, that average page size would reach 4 megabytes by November 2019. As I said, we're not probably going to have a solid source on whether or not that's true, but it certainly would seem that the average page size would have continued to increase since HTTP Archive changed their metric. So let's talk about the solution. Sustainable web design, there it is. There are, broadly speaking, 4 pillars to sustainable web design. Obviously, this talk is going to have a bit of a focus on WordPress, but I know that not everyone here will necessarily use WordPress, so I'm going to try and make it as broad as possible, but there will be some callbacks to WordPress along the way. The 4 pillars are performance, usability, discoverability, and green hosting. Performance and usability, I think, kind of come together as one thing because it's quite hard to separate some of the different ways that we can improve that. So I'm going to present them as one. And I'm going to begin with simplifying the interface. Before we get into any technical details, there are numerous philosophical decisions that can be made in the very first stages of a new web project or design. For SustainableUX, my focus was that elements on the page had to have a very good reason to be there. And if they weren't absolutely necessary, they were gone. So in that vein, we've got things like background videos, modal dialogues, social media buttons, carousels, all that kind of thing. Do we need all these things? Probably not. I mean, obviously this is opinionated, but that's the way I'm going to go with this. Sustainable web design is kind of opinionated in and of itself. Lots of different research projects have shown that users don't like most of the craft that we stuff into websites. Things like carousels have been proven to have very little user interaction. Almost no one actually goes near them, and people don't really like them. They prefer just to be able to click on an image and see the image large, or and in so many cases, I think that it's one of those things that everyone's always done, so we just kind of feel like we need them. And then obviously in the more recent problems we're getting with things like video backgrounds and stuff add a lot of weight to a website. And again, they can look nice, but are they absolutely necessary? Probably not. Once we've decided on as simple as possible an interface, our next focus should be to write as little code as possible. So we need to talk about creating lean HTML, simplifying our CSS, and using less script. There's a great quote from Hayden Pickering, who's written a lot about performance and this kind of thing. The most performance, sustainable, accessible, and easily maintainable feature of a website is the one that you don't make in the first place. Obviously, the bit in square brackets is my own addition to Hayden's fine words. So, creating lean HTML. This is a trivial example, but there are countless ways that developers often end up writing more code than they need to. And then we've got things like divitis and classitis. They're easy traps to fall into. I didn't realize how bad my particular affliction was until I started working on Susty and realizing how much extra craft I got used to adding to my pages, particularly with classes. I only styled with classes. But that comes on to our next bit. I did write some slides here, but it got a bit esoteric, and I'm mindful that not everyone attending this conference is a front-end developer. So the best I can do is highly recommend that for those it concerns, you read this article. A very brief executive summary of Hayden's article is that he goes into some depth on the original design and intention of CSS and how it interfaces with HTML. The web design world has broadly fallen into a malaise of endless classes and data attributes and that sort of thing, which we use for styling and interaction. But this is not the leanest or most efficient way of writing code and can lead to a lot of repetition and bloat. So yeah, it's much more about writing CSS that interacts with the elements directly rather than building up just classes and classes and classes in your CSS. An interesting article that's worth reading in this vein is by Sarah Diane, How I Dropped 250 kilobytes of Dead CSS Weight with Purge CSS. What that title actually doesn't even show is that her CSS bundle dropped from 259 kilobytes to 9 kilobytes. So as a percentage drop, it's absolutely enormous. It's not just like she shaved 250 off a 1 megabyte CSS file. It's a really good read, and this kind of tree shaking is something you can be doing with older projects, but obviously when you're getting started in the first place, it's really nice to have a blank canvas. Use less script. So again, a trivial example here, but here's a remarkable thing. Can you believe it takes 50 kilobytes of data transfer to show this button from Twitter? There are much bigger examples where we can cut scripts, of course, but if we just had a plain text link or even created our own little image that does the same thing, we could make this much, much, much smaller. The low-hanging fruit here also includes avoiding using heavy frameworks like jQuery if possible. A lot of the time people will use jQuery just to, do a hover effect or something, and often that thing is quite easily achievable with just JavaScript. But on a higher level, it's also worth thinking about whether or not we really need things like Google Analytics, which adds a significant amount of bloat. It does add, some usability. So if that's something that you're definitely going to be analyzing those stats. But I added Google Analytics to all of my stuff just as a kind of matter of course. And then I kind of started to think about it and thought, most of those projects I never even log in and look at the analytics. So I don't know if we always need it. Sometimes we probably do. Given that images are a big part of the performance picture with websites, they deserve a bit of consideration. So first up, use the right image. Compress the image as much as possible, and lazy load. So let's go into a bit more detail here. Use the right image. So there's lots of different formats. JPEG is one of the kind of oldest and best loved formats. It's for still images and photography. That's kind of what it excels at. It sort of isn't designed for doing. It doesn't deal with transparency and that kind of thing. So it's got limitations. But if you're just doing photography, it's probably the most efficient format you can use. GIFs, in the olden days we used these for animations and for things that needed a bit of transparency. They can pretty much be avoided altogether now, and that's in part because you could use something like PNG8 instead if you're doing icons and that kind of thing. Though even then, SVG is probably better, we'll come to that. PNG24, this is another format which is a bit more like JPEG but also has transparency support. The trouble with PNG24 is it's huge, so we should try to avoid it if possible, and if you do need a still image with transparency, there's normally ways of getting around it that don't involve using a PNG. So for example, you could just try and, if you need like a person against a black background and they're cut out, then put the black background in the JPEG, and that's a better way of trying to do that if you can do it. But yeah, the PNG8 and the GIF, they're kind of now also superseded by SVG, which is pretty widely supported now. There's been loads of articles written about SVGs over the last few years, so I won't go into too much detail, but if you look at CSS Tricks, for example, it's a great resource on how to use SVGs. But all of these formats, except SVG, are potentially being superseded at the moment. So I've got a bit of a bonus here, WebP. So WebP is a new format. They're 26% smaller than PNGs on average, 25 to 34% smaller than JPEGs, and they support animation, so you can actually use them instead of GIFs. I should have also said on the last slide, you'll typically find that people, like Twitter.com, for example, when you upload a GIF, actually turns it into an MP4. Movies and using the video elements in HTML is normally more efficient than using a GIF. Again, lots more about that. But you could use WebP. WebP is something I was a little bit skeptical about because Firefox hadn't supported it. It's been developed by Google and it was only available in Chrome. But as of Firefox 65, which landed on the 29th of January, WebP is now supported in Firefox. And as you can now see, the Can I Use page for WebP is starting to look pretty good. The remaining outliers are, well, the big one is really Safari, so it's not currently supported on Apple devices, tablets and phones. Obviously, Apple devices with Firefox will run it, but yeah. So it's definitely something worth looking into. There's still there isn't a great drop-in plugin at the moment for WordPress. That's something I'm working on right now. But there are some other plugins that can do it through CDNs and stuff. So the executive summary of WebP is that the easiest way to start using it, if you have your images in WebP format alongside other formats, is you can actually use the source set attribute for responsive images. That will work. So if you have WebPs first and then you move on to JPEGs or whatever, the browser will pick out the WebP if it supports WebP, which is pretty good. Compressing our images. Again, this could be a whole talk, but I'll just give a very top-level summary. There's a great website for resources called imageoptim.com. ImageOptim is a Mac app. I'm actually a Linux user, so I can't use the app that brings everything together. But what the Mac app actually does is it just runs a series of different compression tools, and all of those are available on the command line. So if you're quite technical, you can do all of that yourself without actually using ImageOptim. And as this page is advertising, they have an API. There's lots of resources there and explanations of how images can get shrunk down. But as you can see on that home page, they're squishing a JPEG from 27.1 kilobytes to 14.3 kilobytes, and then that JPEG would probably be sort of 10 kilobytes if it was a WebP, which is pretty cool. Lazy loading. Again, this is a whole topic of its own that I won't go into too much detail. There's a very good article on the Google Web Fundamentals documentation for developers. So if you're interested in this, like, go and check this out. This is a very good primer. The concept, how it just basically works for anyone who's not familiar, is that instead of loading all the images on a website in one go, like as the user arrives on the website, images that are below the fold, as people used to call it, or kind of further down the page, are not immediately loaded. And then as the user scrolls down the page, those images get loaded. Now that's good, because if the user leaves the website before they ever looked at those images are never loaded, or video. So it's a really useful tool. If you are using WordPress, it's available within the Jetpack plugin. So if you install Jetpack, you can actually just activate lazy loading, and you have to do nothing more. So you can be completely non-technical and just activate lazy loading in Jetpack, which is great. Backend stuff, again, this is a UX conference, so I won't go into very much detail. These are things to chat with your backend developers about, but all websites now should be using HTTPS over HTTP2. It's a much more efficient way of delivering content, and yeah, it's a way that you can make your website a little bit greener. If you are using WordPress, then just take this line and take it to your developers and talk to them about it. Nginx is a common part of a WordPress setup, and something like fast CGI cache, what it does effectively is allow you to cache all of your WordPress web pages, so that instead of your server having to like access the database and get the content out of it when it's serving up its WordPress stuff, it's all just stored in a cache. So it's kind of somewhere towards what people talk about with serverless sites and Jekyll and these kind of static site generators, because your server isn't necessarily doing the heavy lifting it would normally have to do. A kind of basic implementation, if you do just have a little WordPress website that you want to try this out with, WP Supercache is a very accessible plugin that's you just activate it. It doesn't have hardly any configuration. That does something similar to the above. It's not as configurable, but what it will do is allow it will create HTML versions of all of the pages on your WordPress website, and it will serve those instead of the normal WordPress pages to your visitors, and it will automatically purge the cache when things get updated. It will remove things when they get deleted. But again, there's a lot of hype around static site generators, but if you set up a server properly with WordPress, it kind of is a static site anyway. It doesn't have to be running on the database and on the server all the time. So discoverability, this is the kind of next big pillar, and a big part of this is SEO. And again, this is a UX talk, so a UX conference, sorry, and a UX talk, so I won't get into lots of detail, but the key point here from a sustainability perspective is that if users are spending a lot of time trying to find the stuff they want to find, that's wasting energy. And that's why well-optimized sites that can be found quickly through search engines and that are designed in such a way that when you find them through search engines, you find the thing that you are actually looking for, it makes them greener because there's fewer page loads and people can, more rapidly get to what they're trying to get to. So if you are using WordPress, there's WordPress SEO by Yoast, which is the kind of market leader now. It has millions and millions of installs. All-in-one SEO pack is another very popular plugin. Both of these plugins are sort of educational as well. You'll find that they help explain what they do as you start to use them. And a lot of the stuff they do, which I'm going to sort of allude to in a moment, is it's kind of common sense stuff. It's a lot of SEO is actually just about like the text that you use, the copy that you write is part of how your website becomes more easily found. And certainly as like in the olden days, people used to really game Google, and Google have kind of increasingly got rid of all those ways that you can game them and get your site to the top, because it's not good for Google, because it means they're not necessarily showing the best stuff. So they are trying to find the best stuff. So if your content is the best content, then that should help you get to the top. And you could use neither of the above, and you might not be using WordPress at all. And if you want to learn more about search engine optimization generally, this starter guide, again from Google's documentations, is really good. It explains all of the basics and kind of gives an executive summary of a lot of the basic things that those plugins would do for your site. And it's worth noting as well that out of the box, something like WordPress is already pretty good in terms of search engine optimization. It already puts a lot of the right tags in the right places, and a lot of the elements are set up in the way that they should be. So it's a very deep rabbit hole, so we won't go any deeper. Now, the fourth pillar, green hosting. and this is something that Anne was talking about in her talk, and yeah, obviously, ideally, what we want and where we're trying to get to is that all hosts are green. But in the short term, if you just want to make your website green, then there are some hosts that you can now use. The Green Web Foundation probably has the most comprehensive directory of hosts powered by renewable energy. It's not perfect, but it's as good as we currently have. So if you click on the directory thing that you can see up in the up there, then that will take you to their directory of hosts. And they also have an extension for Chrome and an extension for Firefox, which allow you to see via a little kind of green smiley face if a website is hosted on renewable energy, or a grey smiley face if it's not. As I say, the database isn't complete, so plenty of websites that are green hosted will not appear as such, and it doesn't have the granular data on Amazon, so Amazon is just classed as grey, whereas Google Cloud Platform is classed as green. But there are lots of smaller hosts as well if you kind of want to use the smaller companies. That's kind of what I've typically been doing. There's a very good one in the UK called Crystal with a K, crystal.co.uk. They're a very good host as far as I've experienced them, and they're 100% powered on renewable energy. They buy renewable energy for all of their power usage. And there's an American one called Canvas Host if you're in the US. Canvas Host I also find to be very good. There are more dotted all around the world, but they're the two that I've had the most experience with. So let's get on to the doing. We've talked a lot about the theory and about kind of the thought that goes into building sustainable websites, but how does this look in practice? Kind of like this. It obviously doesn't have to look like this, and I will go into more detail. I appreciate this is extremely minimalist, and many clients would not be happy to see a website like this if this is what you delivered, but this is kind of my most extreme example of where we can go with this. So as you can see, there's just the logo in the top left, there's a menu button in the top right, and we have some content. And this was delivered in 6 kilobytes. When I most recently have been checking it, it's coming in at 9 because it's loading 2 PNGs that don't need to be loaded. But anyway, I'm just going to work out why that's happening and stop that happening. But it's still very small. That's the important thing, given that the average website was 3 megabytes in 2017. To start me off, I took Underscores, which is a best practice starter theme for WordPress. It includes almost no specific design and is generally considered as bare bones as a theme can be. But with my new sustainable web design hat on, I saw things through a new lens. An inbuilt part of the WordPress theming paradigm is that you have a sidebar, for example. But I realized I definitely didn't need one. And from that point on, I began a kind of root and branch process, which saw me reduce 3,578 lines of code, which is how Underscores is when it comes out of the box, which is pretty small, to be fair. I reduced that down to 1,295. And once I'd done that, I used tools like Lighthouse by Google to see how successful I had been. So it definitely didn't initially start like this. I did do some further work. But Lighthouse is very handy. It gives you a really good breakdown, and now I get 100s across the board. The only thing I don't get 100s for is the progressive web app, and this is mainly because it doesn't run offline yet. There's a whole bunch of things with service workers that I haven't done. I am working on that, but yeah, the progressive web app thing, it's not quite there yet. But that's about being able to kind of save the site to your screen on your phone on Android and run it like an application. Another really good tool is Web Page Test. I can highly recommend this. As you can see, Susty does very well. And in fact, in their estimation, as you can see here, it is still 6 kilobytes. So because that isn't downloading the pointless PNGs, which it doesn't need. So Web Page Test, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this. It's a very good way of kind of seeing how you're doing. And again, these scores that they give you do correlate to a large extent to how sustainable your website is. Now, obviously, it's great building a website that's fast and performant and sustainable, but maintaining that can be quite difficult. So there are apps like Calibre. I've used the free trial, it's very good. This allows you to kind of continuously monitor a website and see how much the front-end performance is improving or decreasing over time. So if someone on your team has added a load of extra images to the homepage, you can see how that compares to how it was and everything else. In the interest of fairness, another very good service that I've tested out is SpeedCurve. These are two that I would strongly recommend. SpeedCurve does a very similar thing. It monitors your site over time and allows you to kind of see improvements and regressions. To get actual green information on your website, there are some emerging tools. EcoGrader, I think, is the kind of original. This was one of the first ones that came out. So Mighty Bytes, which is Tim Frick's agency, put this together. It's really good. I highly recommend giving it a go. It combines data from Google PageSpeed Insights, I think, with some other information that they've gathered themselves. It also uses the Green Web Foundations directory to tell you about the hosting of the website and that sort of thing. And I think they've got some additional information on that. They know if the host is just buying credits, as in just offsetting, or if they're actually powered by renewable energy. It's a really good tool. One of the most recent ones I've come across is Ecometer. This is a group of French students that put this together, and it's quite cool. I had a go with it the other day, and I quite like the look of it. They've got some good information on there as well, so definitely worth checking out ecometer.org. And one of my favourite ones is websitecarbon.com, which has been put together by Wholegrain Digital, and obviously we have a speaker from Wholegrain Digital today. So yeah, this is really cool. This actually gives you an emissions breakdown, an emissions estimate of your website, and based on how many users come to it, and so if you do know that data, you can get a pretty interesting readout from them. So yeah, that's worth checking out. Now, in the real world, because this is something I've heard a few times in the things that I've written and said about sustainable web design. People say, well, that's all well and good, you've got your 6 kilobyte website, but my boss wouldn't let me do that in the real world, and clients won't be happy with that, and blah, 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 blah. So I've got some examples of sites that I think are doing a really good job. And bearing in mind that I'm happily acknowledging 6 kilobytes is very, very, very small. And I think what we're trying to do is get somewhere from way down from kind of 3 megabytes, but maybe not quite as small as 6 kilobytes. So one of my favorite examples actually is gov.uk. For people that aren't familiar, there's been a massive drive in the UK that's been running since, I think, 2010. Government Digital Services, which is a lot of money was invested in actually making all of the UK's online services a lot better than they were. And it inspired, I think, the US Digital Services as well, which is kind of a program that's happened kind of in response. So some of the best web developers and designers and UX folk and a whole bunch of people have put a lot of effort and work into improving gov.uk and all of the ways that you apply for driving licenses and renew passports and all that kind of thing. And this is it. And I have to say, I do find it quite astonishing that a central government website is 417 kilobytes. I think that's brilliant, and well worth checking out. And there's a whole load of case studies and people that have been writing about this kind of work. So yeah, definitely worth checking that out. Another real-world example, .york, is 409 kilobytes, and this site is great. You can scroll down. I didn't want to do that with the kind of jankiness of animation and everything in a online conference, but check out .york.com. This is a conference in York, in Old York in the UK, a digital conference every year. It's a great conference, and the site is lovely. And to see one this small, I was very impressed with. Most conference websites are huge because they have loads of images and everything else. As you scroll down, there are images of speakers and that kind of thing as well. So this isn't just all graphics, but you can see they've been really creative with using SVGs and CSS to create this really artistic background that's not just kind of dull and plain like my Susty thing, but you can do some really nice stuff without using up huge amounts of megabytes and everyone's data. Another really impressive site is dev.to. This is a developer community website. Again, 379 kilobytes. They do a lot of advanced kind of lazy loading stuff here, so as you start to scroll down the page, it does load up more stuff, though it's very well optimized and very performant, very impressive in my opinion. And Wholegrain Digital, again, I was extremely impressed with their website. I spoke to Tom, who's the CEO of Wholegrain Digital, and or managing director, because they're not American. And yeah, their old website was not this light, and this was a really impressive redesign. It's 213 kilobytes without even lazy loading anything on the home page. So there are images, there are case studies, and all sorts of things featured on the homepage that look really neat and tidy, and it's 213 kilobytes, which I think is extremely impressive. And an example, I think, although it's a bit bigger, I love this project so much. Low Tech Magazine, it's already been mentioned in the Slack for this conference. Highly recommend you check out this post as well because it's fascinating. But Low Tech Magazine is a really funny. Well, it's not funny. It's very good. But they make some very interesting points about the general kind of world of low tech and the problems with high tech, and how low tech solutions are kind of cool and kind of going against the grain of how a lot of people, I think, view low-tech things. So, but their solar subdomain, which they're working on, is a website that is that lives, I think, as I understand it, it's in someone's apartment in Barcelona. It's I think powered from it's living on a Raspberry Pi, and it's powered by a battery which is connected to a solar panel. And as the battery drains, you can see the background of the website kind of drops down. So it's fully peachy when it's fully charged, and it gradually drains down. So you can see right now it's at 65%, and they say it sometimes goes offline. I don't think I've actually seen it go offline, but it should theoretically have enough power, I think, in the battery to last through the night until the next day. But obviously when the weather gets bad in Barcelona, which isn't that frequently, but when it does, there is scope for the website to go, for the battery to go flat and the website to switch off. But what a neat idea, really cool. And there's actually some really interesting stuff they've done in terms of the technology of the website itself. So you can see this large image that's being featured. It kind of looks a bit kind of hazy and a bit kind of scruffy, and this is because they've gone with an image compression technique, which is kind of a really old school way of compressing images, which is dithering. So it's I won't get into the technology of it, but it's kind of like a dot matrix rendering of the images, and all their images are like this. Which means what's really nice about it is they actually use quite a lot of images, and they're quite big. You know, they're not just these kind of little tiny images. And they are extremely small for the size, you know, for considering that they are full-size JPEGs. It's a way of compressing them beyond kind of what we normally try to achieve in terms of lossless compression. So really cool, definitely worth having a look at that. And then possibly the winner of all of them for me, because it's just extremely impressive. This is a project from a little group called Little Big Things. Their main website is currently, I think it's a web developer, it might just be a freelancer, but this was entered into the A List Apart competition, the 10K Apart, which was trying to, you know, produce impactful projects within a 10 kilobyte budget. It kind of comes in at 11. I don't know if that's maybe something's changed over time, who knows. But this is especially impressive if you check it out, because it's got all sorts of animation going on, and it's only a couple of kilobytes. Well, it's 5 kilobytes more than Susty, and it is a heck of a lot more impressive visually. The Earth kind of gradually goes across the screen, and it's really cool. And obviously it's making a really good point, which is very relevant to the subject of this conference. So in conclusion, sustainable websites are more performant, more user-friendly, more accessible, more server-friendly, and better optimized for search engines. I've gone with the American spelling as an alternative there. They really kind of, I think the really nice thing about trying to design websites sustainably is that it overlaps with everything we're trying to achieve anyway with websites, and it meshes very well with a lot of the work that's currently going on. There's so many books at the moment about web performance. It's, you know, performance in itself has become a huge thing because it's, you know, it's now taken into account by search engines. So if your website is slow to load, you know, you're going to be hit in so many different ways, as well as the fact that you're polluting the planet more. Yeah, so I think it's a great thing for us to be able to embrace as web developers and to kind of actually make a positive impact in the work that we do. Thank you very much, and you can email me at this email address if you have any questions, and I'll be in the Slack as of now. Thank you.